what I thought I'd do is just share a little bit of what we've learned in terms of how skills are bearing out in the market today, in terms of how skills become a effective mechanism for increasing mobility, for increasing opportunity and prosperity, and for also, very importantly, rising to the imperative of growing workplace equity today. And then looking forward to the conversation that ensues. So let me go ahead here. I think you can all see my screen. So let me start off here with I think a really important finding from some recent research that we released a couple months ago, looking at the dynamism of skills in the market today. We're used to hearing a lot about the dynamism of the market itself, and to the idea that jobs are going away, new jobs are being born. There was, I think a few years back, many of us may remember there was a report that came out that said, by 2030, 70% of us are going to be working in jobs that haven't been born yet. There's absolutely no evidence in the data to support that kind of assertion thus far. And with 8 years left on the clock, I think we've got a big enough distance that I think we can debunk that. But what we are seeing is a really profound rate of skill change within jobs. So in other words, not jobs going away, but jobs being redefined in very substantial ways, right? So the average US job over the last 5 years has seen 37% of its top skills replaced. When you just step back and think about that, has 37% of the curriculum of your average community college changed in the last 5 years? Well, of course not. Have companies changed 37% of their training programs in the last 5 years? And of course not. By the way, our assumption would be these are mostly tech jobs. Here's an example of marketing specialists. We're about half of whose requirements have changed. You're seeing on the right how this trend has accelerated just over the course of the pandemic. In production technicians, so this is factory floor folks. So we're seeing this across the board. Now, one of the things which is an important aspect of this, I think we're kind of again, when you think of skills changing at this kind of rate, our first instinct is to say this is about tech change. Okay, tech stacks change, people have to learn new technologies, and there's certainly no shortage of that going on in the market today. But what we're seeing is actually significantly more profound than that, and I think more disruptive, and creates both greater challenge to the work that we're all come together to undertake, and also some new opportunities that we may not be thinking about. And that's that increasingly the way that jobs are getting reshaped is not just that the technologies are changing, but that skills are blending from across domains. Increasingly, just jobs are requiring skills that are almost orthogonal to the traditional definition of work. Looking here at the bottom left at the comparison of an accountant and a data scientist. So these are both jobs that are at least nominally involved in the data world. By the way, historically, I always like to point out that accountants were the data scientists of the 19th century before, just like everyone wants to be a data scientist today. Before the Industrial Revolution, you didn't need people doing ledger math. You ran your firm out of the gold in your purse. But it's beyond sort of a comparison of epoch. The comparison between accountants and data scientists illustrates a really important point here, which is you were to ask, what are the skills of an accountant? Well, this is what my kids would say is sort of the no duh, right? You need accounting skills. What are the skills you need to be a data scientist? Well, data skills, sure, but actually more significantly programming skills, and not trivially business skills, because we don't just hire data scientists to run the numbers, we hire them to run the numbers to solve business problems. Now think about where those different sets of skills live. Those are currently workers who are wearing different hats that don't normally get worn on the same head inside our traditional infrastructure for skill development. Those live in different departments and different silos. And yet increasingly we're gonna need to blend them. And you can see that bear out on the right. If you were to look at the sets of jobs, on the one hand, we've seen, I think you went from about 150 jobs 10 years ago that required, like literally 150, that into 2010 that required that for data scientists. Last year, that was about 50 some odd thousand. But if you look at jobs that have need for data analytics skills in an intensive way, that went from 10 years ago, about 300,000 jobs in 17 occupations to last year, about 1.2 million in 81 occupations. We're seeing these skills spread out. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but it raises important questions about what's foundational. By the way, this is not just a, data science and other kind of high-tech job kind of phenomenon. In the world of middle skill work, and hopefully we're coming up with a better term maybe than that, in addition to just the essential skills terminology. But I'm using it as shorthand. I think we all know what I'm referring to here, right? These jobs, 8 and 10, are now digitally intensive. Digitally intensive middle skills growing twice as fast as those that are not, twice as likely to pay a living wage. And the 2 and 10 that are not digitally intensive are increasingly concentrated in construction and transportation, right? So across the full spectrum of workers, there's sets of skills that are going to be needed that we don't necessarily know, that most people aren't necessarily tracking. All the more so as we look at what are the key engines of the new economy, the 21st century economy. We've been tracking the rise of 5 emerging economies, the readiness economy, logistics economy, the green economy, the remote economy, the automated economy. Combined, we project that those 5 economies will create millions of new jobs. I think actually overall about 15 million new jobs over the next 5 years. But which is great, right? Like, creating new jobs is opportunity for workers. We're pro. But there is a but. When you look on the right at this thing that looks like a COVID spike protein, I realize you can't read it, and I'm glad to send this around, so no need to crane at your screens. But if you look over here on the bottom, at 3 o'clock, these are the skills in general. These are the skills of some of these new economies. 3 o'clock, you see this skill called industrial big data analytics. And what you're seeing is that there's projected demand for 600,000 jobs over the next 5 years requiring industrial big data analytics. I'm a student of job market, and I didn't know what that was. I asked my team, like, well, what is that, guys? Right, so increasingly there's going to be sets of skills that we aren't thinking about today, we're not tracking today, which are not part of job design today, which we need to actually not only anticipate, but we need to create a training infrastructure for. I parsed out, this automated economy, bottom left, because of its fast growth rate. It's important to recognize that these are big categories, right? You have to break them out, and then you have to say, what are the jobs that underlie them? And even in jobs where we think, hey, we know what a software engineer does, a software engineer working in autonomous vehicles is much more likely to need deep learning skills, to need robot operating systems, SLAM skills than others. And so there's a lot of landmines in here that go beyond simply saying, hey, look, we need to put more air in the balloon. The shape of the balloon is going to change. And in fact, here's an example from mechanical engineers, right? Mechanical engineer who is working in some new parts and new sectors all of a sudden needs actually fundamentally totally different skill sets from the traditional definition of the job. Now, our existing infrastructure for addressing these, for being able to produce talent, for being able to arm workers with the skills they need, hasn't necessarily been delivering well at being able to create those skills and launch people effectively or move people up effectively. And there's a couple of dimensions of that, of those failures I think are worth calling out. on the one hand is just sort of a sheer numbers challenge, right? There are parts of the economy where the rising demand for talent and the current throughput of talent just don't match up. You see on the left around logisticians, and as we hear more and more about supply chain challenges, this hits home. On the other side of the spectrum, you can look at CTE programs. In an analysis that we did a couple of years ago for the Excel and Ed Foundation, a 50-state analysis of CTE spending. And look, the spigots have been opened up on CTE spending, and I think that's good. But what we found was that of the third-party credentials that CTE systems are funding, only 18% are actually in demand by employers, while a whole set of others are going unfilled, which could actually provide workers with significant value. And then it also turns out that we're just not that good at launching new programs. If you look at degree programs that launched, but across the spectrum of associates, bachelor's, masters, that launched in 2013 and 2014, and then you sort of fast forward the tape. In other words, they first conferrals in 2013, 2014, and so at the end of when we did this analysis, the last year of IPED's reporting, what you find is that literally a third of them were conferring no degrees 5 years later. Half were conferring fewer than 5, right? So the threshold of financial viability, the threshold of actually producing talent at scale for most programs isn't being met. Meanwhile, we also know that we're failing a fundamental mission of education in being the great equalizer. A Black student with an associate's degree makes less than a white high school diploma earner. So that changes, that sets an important, going back to the question of skills, it raises an important imperative to say, okay, look, we've made some progress, not enough, in broadening representation on campus, but are we doing enough to build the skills of graduates to make sure that everyone is being successful? That's all the more the case. And by the way, I'll stick to my order. I hate being driven by PowerPoint slides. I think it's all the more the case here when we think about what some of those kinds of solutions for increasing equity may be. Work-based learning, I know there's important discussion going on in one of the work groups on learn and earn models, other models of non-classroom based learning. And I'm sure there's good familiarity in terms of some of the impact, but here we use a standard which tends not to get used that much, which is the rate of underemployment of graduates. So this is people winding up in a job that doesn't require their degree. There is a significant improvement in how much people earn based upon or in how much underemployment people experience based upon the participation in work-based learning. The students who benefit the most, Black and Latinx students, are the ones who are least likely to have those experiences. And so I think that creates a good illustration of the ways in which higher education institutions need to think more deeply about where skill-based learning fits into their model. We're at this moment right now of, almost what I'd sort of call a paradox. on the one hand, we've got a public whose perception of the value of higher education is deeply shaken. I think you're seeing a generational epical change in the perception of higher education value, which you can see on the left. And on the right, you're seeing that employers are also increasingly saying, maybe we don't need a degree, maybe we can hire for skills. And so that says that our current infrastructure for skill development, which may or may not be the one that exists in the future, but it's one we've got, needs to realize that they need to both serve a broader market and also be able to invest their programs of study with more relevance from a degree perspective. That means being able to identify what skills matter. I'm here an example of graphic designers, and it's just a simple framework here that's laying out the occupational specificity of skills and the occupational frequency of skills. So you can see there's some sets of skills that are core to the role that every graphic designer needs to know. Generally speaking, most training providers, most education providers understand what those are. Where we tend to miss the boat is these other two quadrants. There are sets of skills that are indeed essential, and I really like the term, to work. And those aren't just the sort of the core traditional foundations or soft skills. These are skills which are indeed foundational to various kinds of work. Graphic designers do project-based work. It's not surprising that a lot of them need project management skills and budgeting skills. There are very few graphic design programs that teach those skills. We don't have the framework which is calling those out. And as a result, we are winding up with graphic designers who are underprepared. Conversely, there are sets of emerging skills which graphic designers need and could use to build their competitiveness, which differentiate talent, which make them more future-proof, which again, we aren't necessarily keeping our eye on that ball. The other thing which I'll point out here is these foundational skills. Now, when we define this set of foundational skills together with first PHEF and then ASA, what we looked for were not just kind of, again, what are those core, those broad, timeless skills, as my friend Lori Leshin likes to call them, but instead to say, what are skills that are cutting across every kind of work? And when you look at it from that lens, yes, you see a bunch of human skills in very high demand, but also you start to see sets of digital skills, data skills, and business skills, which are needed across the economy in high value work. Take the example, business skills seems almost sort of counterintuitive or sort of like fingernails on the chalkboard to say that business skills are foundational. But think about project management. Whether you're in construction, you're in IT, whether you're a nurse who increasingly needs to be able to manage care across providers, increasingly you need those kinds of project management skills. It is very important to recognize that high value work needs foundational skills. In fact, the highest value jobs that we study are dramatically more likely to look for foundational skills, for those core human skills and for others. And as a result, they are significantly less vulnerable to automation. So I said that not all skills are created equal, that we need to focus on which skills matter. And I also said, I want to start here with two frames of understanding this. One is looking at the framework of opportunity occupations, which Fed researchers advanced. Stu, I may have dropped Atlanta here, it looks like. Apologies on that. But in any case, this is a very useful framework of saying, hey, what are those jobs that workers can transition into that pay above a median wage, and don't require a degree. And then what are the jobs that people transition into those occupations from? And that provides a very good awareness of how to start prioritizing skills, right? There's some sets of skills that are driving mobility. Here on the right is a different analysis that we've been undertaking to be able to look role by role, what are those sets of skills that increase workers' mobility? And a customer service worker who has social media skills is 2.5 times more likely to move up out of a poverty trap job and into a well-paying job than one who doesn't have those sets of skills. So if we can isolate what those are, it provides another dimension. And indeed, in a world where we increasingly are going to need to build productivity in a human economy where productivity is defined by skills, skills become important in investments. So if you want to look at a maintenance technician, you'll see on the left sets of skills that maintenance technicians need. On the right, you'll see sets of skills that a maintenance technician who's going to work in robotics is going to need. Right. And so you can see there are sets of skills that they can build or that become significantly more important. And if we have that roadmap, then we know how to help people acquire mobility. We know how to help people launch more effectively. For, here's an example of marketing managers. There are skills that characterize a highly paid marketing manager and a low paid marketing manager, and we need to know what those are. They also are skills that help people who are already in their careers arbitrage in that career. Here's again an example of graphic designers. A graphic designer who has interaction design experience makes $16,000, almost $17,000 more than one who doesn't have that. This is a classic case of arbitrage, right? We all remember the economics 101, that arbitrage thing, the buy low, sell high thing that you can do. Helping people invest themselves with the right skills is the unique alchemy of helping people arbitrage in themselves. Make someone who's making $51,000 make $67,000, $68,000. It didn't cost them, if we get to efficient packaging, $16,000, $17,000 to do this. So this is core to how people can achieve mobility in the economy that we're in and then we're increasingly going to be in. We've done a lot of work looking at how people move up out of poverty trap jobs. And certainly kind of where you start matters, what kind of career you're in, what sort of industry, what sort of career changes you take matter. But it's also a question of specific steps. Here's an example of retail, and I think retail is a really important one because if we're trying to think about how skills can invest people with mobility, if we're not talking about low-paid retail and hospitality workers, we're missing the bogey. It's easy to say, look, and I think there's some wonderful programs out there which are doing heroes work of helping people in jobs like retail step into software development and cybersecurity jobs and the like. They tend to be fairly small scale. So when you look at those real world transition paths, I'm surprised to see that there's a few percent of retail workers wind up transitioning into tech roles. Now, first time I looked at that, I said, okay, well, that's probably a quirk in the data because these are people probably working their way through college. And when you dug into it, we saw much more often was something that looks like this. I'm selling refrigerators at Best Buy. I get some more skill. I'm selling consumer electronics at Best Buy. I get a few more skills. I'm setting up people's consumer electronics at Best Buy. I get A+ certification and I'm on a help desk job. And from there, maybe into network support and network engineering. The key then is realizing that we need to treat transitions not as once and done, but as a set of short transitions. Most people aren't good at leaping tall buildings in a single bound. And so it's saying, okay, what are those skill adjacencies job to job? What are the transitions that can build on somebody's existing skills? How do we isolate the very specific skills that will enable somebody to take a leap? And then how do we make sure that they can acquire mobility? I want to close off on this idea. This idea that skills can enable people to make effective transitions on the one side, that can enable employers to solve talent shortages on the other by being very specific and addressing very specific gaps, is not only effective at addressing today's labor shortages, but it also can be game-changing in getting past the zero-sum game of diversity that we tend to find ourselves in today. Companies tend to think of talent in very discrete buckets, and in those buckets, you say, okay, well, I'm looking for people who have the exact set of skills that I need. I'm looking for people who have experience as, in this case, an operations coordinator. We're only about a little over 20% of operations coordinators are Black or Latinx. On the other hand, 30% of inventory specialists, 40% of shipping clerks are. Each of those is a step that is not so many skills apart. And so the ability for us to be able to get more specific about skills and how they work is the opportunity to be able to drive inclusive growth, to be able to find talent from within. Let's finish with this example. This is an example from Cleveland a couple of years ago, which in their economic development plan said, okay, we need to be able to, it's going to be a strategic priority for our economic growth to have more industrial production managers. Right now, we have 2,400 people. We need another 10,000, another 9,000. That's not going to come just by graduating people or whatever. What are other talent pools we can skill up? And what are those sets of skills that you need to acquire? In a lot of cases, those adjacent talent pools are significantly more diverse. So we're not only creating new pipelines of talent, but we're creating a model of, through this kind of mechanism, can create a model of inclusive growth that I think can be transformational for the society we live in.